Good afternoon, everyone. This is the paper study that I will present is a product of my long-term plan of trying to come up with a development framework for indigenous peoples. My planned PhD thesis in American University of Sovereign Nations. And the community, the indigenous community that I will be presenting is a different community, is Taga-Kaulo. Taga-Kaulo means coming from, really from the wellspring, from the mountains. It's in Malita, Davao Occidental. The reason why I chose this, later on I will discuss why. And the reason why, the title why I said it's really an orchestrated cultural annihilation, that the experience of indigenous peoples, particularly in Mindanao. Basically, the contemporary experience of indigenous peoples in Mindanao is the one approaching cultural annihilation because of the different wars, kind of wars of conflict that are happening in their communities. These different conflicts or wars can be, in my exploration and in my study, there is one common cause, which is basically the ongoing war against the earth, basically connected with the presentation of Professor Jack. And this war has its roots in economy, which fails to respect ecological and ethical elements such as limits to inequality, limits to injustice, limits to greed and economic concentration. This war has resulted not only to the death and destruction of indigenous cultural communities and their entire ecosystem, but also the death of the indigenous peoples themselves in Mindanao. That's why a while ago I was asking if had there been violence, especially in the area of Australia, because this is happening. For example, in northern and central parts of Mindanao for the last, I think, 6 or 5 years or even 7 years ago until now, there have been killings of indigenous peoples, activists and even leaders of indigenous peoples, and all these killings are connected to the coming of corporations that put up a kind of development projects in their territories, and the efforts of some indigenous peoples to resist this kind of, I will say, kind of development aggression that is happening. In the other part of, say for example, in the other part of Mindanao, near our place, among the Blaans, another group of indigenous peoples, there had been conflict not only between indigenous peoples and the companies, but also among themselves, because they have been divided, they've been polarized into two camps because of the coming of these mining companies. Those who would like to support are really welcoming the company, but those who really resisted the coming of companies are causing a lot of conflict. And because of this, there have been clashes between indigenous communist insurgents, and mostly around 80% of the members of these groups now are coming from indigenous peoples. The NPAs, or the New People's Army, the foot soldiers of the Communist Party of the Philippines, and as studies it is around 80% are coming from indigenous people. So the clash between this group and the military of the Philippine government are happening in indigenous communities, especially because of, all these are connected with the coming of corporations and companies trying to exploit resources in indigenous people's territories. But there have been also, understandably, there have been indigenous communities with the help of some non-government organizations, civil society, those who are basically left-leaning are also implementing a lot of programs to really, to educate the IPs. They have indigenous people schools, they have many programs and services. But these programs and services are being accused by the military as a breeding ground for the IPs to really rebel against the government. And because of this development, the response of the President of the Philippines is to bomb the school. There have been around 1 year, last year, this is the response. I'm telling those Lumad, or basically Lumad or the IPs, to get out. I'll bomb the structure. This is a pronouncement. It has coming from the fact that a lot of indigenous peoples communities are also controlled by communist insurgents trying to also organize. They have schools, they have health programs, they have basically, and really the kind of doctrine is really coming from the left. And why I chose later on, why I chose the Taga-Kaulo. As a result of that experience, or a threat from no less than the President of the country, some of these schools, in fact, have been closed. And some of the leaders are under surveillance and all these things. The picture, this is one of the schools that I visited, it's already closed. In all my visit, in all my immersions with indigenous peoples, I have this feeling of really trying to understand why, and a kind of realization that said maybe there is this, as the presentation of Professor Jan would say, there is a conflict of values and maybe worldviews, that when this dominant or worldview from the non-indigenous peoples kind of development paradigm trying to impose to the indigenous peoples communities, and the conflict happened because basically when you try to, in my talk with indigenous peoples, they say that they are not needing this one and they don't need this kind of development. So I think this is a conflict of values. So basically there's a call to really understand what is this development for the indigenous peoples, taking into account their cultural practices and traditions. That's why my paper is about cultural annihilation. I would like orchestrated, because I would like to point out later on what are these things that I would say orchestrated cultural annihilation. But specific on this paper, as I said, is focused on Taga-Kaulo. This Taga-Kaulo is basically situated in Malita. Malita is in Davao Occidental, very near our place. This is where I brought Daniel. Into the place. Professor Daniel Missouri of Tel Aviv University, some of you know him. Why I chose Taga-Kaulo? Taga-Kaulo is not affiliated, this group is not affiliated with the left. In fact, they have the schools, and the schools are under threat, but thankfully they were able to continue operating because the government said that they are not affiliated with the left. But even if they are not affiliated with the left and all, they have given permits by the government, they are still under a lot of threat in terms of how they preserve their culture. So that's it. So on this paper, I want to focus on the experiences of the Malita Taga-Kaulo tribes, which are predominantly peace-loving people and chose to live in the hinterlands of Malita, Davao Occidental, after being pushed farther and farther away due to the coming of many intruders, as I said, who impose on the kind of development. So I went into these communities 3 times for the last 2 years. The first one, I brought with me my students and we stayed there for 5 days and 4 nights. The second one, I only came alone and I only stayed for 3 days. And the last one, the third time I visited the community, I was with Professor Daniel Mishuri last October 19 to 25, just recently. And in that visit, I conducted interviews with some of their leaders as well as the missionaries. There's a group now, the Malita Tagakaulo Mission. We call that Matamis. They call themselves Matamis, but Malita Tagakaulo Mission team composed of religious congregations, civil society, and the academy. So, I conducted interviews with them. I also engaged with many of these, in my casual talk, I engaged with many of the people there. And in all this engagement, I observed, while I participated in some of their daily activities, I found out that their concept of development is enjoying their freedom to do what they want to do in their respective cultural communities. Their concept of development is somewhat likened to Amartya Sen's development as freedom. No? In this paper, I would like to use Sen at the same time, also Vandana Shiva, an Indian philosopher, whose book about making peace with the earth is very, I can relate, you know, in terms of trying to make a parallel discussion in this experience. For Sen, the human development is the capacity of people to expand the freedom they enjoy. Thus, for him, the aim of any development program is the well-being of the person. Sen even further said that the capacity of the person has a direct or substantive connection to self-fulfillment or realization. And when a person is given the freedom to exercise his capabilities, he or she will live life to the fullest. So, in this experience, I would like to argue that when the Tagakaulos, this group of people, are given freedom to exercise their capacities and take control over their destiny in their ancestral domain or their cultural community, they will achieve life to the fullest. This freedom can be freedom from coercion, freedom from interference, and also freedom to really exercise their capacities as Tagakaulos. This kind of freedom can only be attained by them if they are attached to their land. So basically, I show you that this orchestrated cultural annihilation is a kind of choreographed activity that try to take away the tribe's control over their land. However, recently, they have been disturbed so many times by the coming of companies and corporations doing business activities in their sacred territories. Some of them were forced to move further and further away. I visited the places very, very, very far, and thinking that they will not be disturbed. However, or sad to say, a large number of them and their communities are still experiencing a period of, I will say, acute crisis due to orchestrated attempts and threats to annihilate their cultural practices and traditions. So if development for Sen, which is also being practiced by the Tagakaulos for a long time, is about enjoying and exercising their freedom and capabilities to practice their culture and tradition in their respective cultural communities, we can now say that the failure to provide space and freedom for the indigenous peoples, specifically the Tagakaulos, to explore and ultimately determine how development programs and projects should affect their destiny, spirituality, and culture, and their well-being, is in turn anti-development. Then we can just say, why is it that a lot of the so-called development workers and with all their programs and projects from the dominant or the Western worldview or the Western model of development continue to intervene into the IP territories and destroy their own concept of the good, their own concept of development, their own concept of the good life. Of course, from the perspective of the government, it is basically to provide development to them and to their communities. The kind of development that is only based on increase of income, increased infrastructures, and technologies. However, as Vandana Shiva puts it, because of this dominant economic model of development, society and culture have been reduced to economies, and economies have been reduced to market economies, and market economies has been reduced to finance, and finance has been reduced to abstract instruments like derivatives, securitization, collateral debt obligation. And I would say, in my experience, I would say it's all about resources. Basically, it's all about the resources. Because this economic model of development cannot also survive without the steady supply of these resources that are basically present in all these communities. You see the picture, this is that Daniel is here, no? It's, that place is, this is the wellspring of the river. And down there is this community, the micro hydro community, funded by European NGO to provide at least electricity and water and electricity to 500 families. It's a hydro renewable energy. But there's been a lot of conflict before it happened. And this is their mountain. This is the Uluru of the Australian. It's the mountain. They call that Mount Padang. The good thing now in this place is that in Malita there is this civil society organization. As I said, the church missionaries and NGOs are helping in their struggle to reclaim their lost identity and resist mainly development, aggression, and oppression. So in some parts of Malita, Davao Occidental, with the Tagakaolos, there is this Malita Tagakaolo mission, or Matamis. It's a very nice word. Matamis in our dialect is a sweet. Tamis is a sweet. Matamis is a team that have been helping the Tagakaolos to regain and reclaim their lost identity. The main and long-term goal of their mission work is to empower these tribes to become independent and self-sufficient in living and practicing their culture and traditions in their communities. So specifically, they have this program. One is Indigenous Youth Leadership Program. Second, they have this Adult Literacy Program. And the third, they have this Cultural Research. For the first program, the IP Youth Leadership Program, they have 3 phases. The phase 1, learning the Tagakaolo cultural identity. The second one is practicing the Tagakaolo cultural identity. And the third is empowering the youth to teach the children to do the same. The IP Youth Leadership Program, especially in the phase 1, since a lot of their young people and children no longer understand, appreciate, and practice some of their cultural practices and tradition. And the reason for this is because they have been educated into the mainstream community. No? That's why, as Professor Jan was saying a while ago, very sensitive. While we would like to educate the indigenous peoples, we have to be very, very careful that the curriculum is culture sensitive. But in the Philippines, when you try to really this standardized way of education, even these indigenous peoples are being forced to really come up with the mainstream. While the idea is quite good, so that they can be mainstreamized, but basically they also lost their cultural practices and tradition. That's why the team, having their own concept of leadership, they try to really teach the children and youth to about their culture and tradition. The second phase, which is, I said, the practicing the Tagakaolo cultural identity, there are workshops on, as we observe, I will show later on the pictures, preparing their traditional food, how to cook their food, the traditional, using the bamboo instead of the kettle and other kitchen utensils. And during important celebrations, they have this traditional cooking. But it's very difficult now. I will show you later why it's very difficult to really sustain. The third phase is about empowering the youth to teach the children to do the same. This is why in most of their mission areas, the teams built up their IP schools. They have their indigenous people schools now that are given permits by the government. Thankfully, after being really interrogated and a lot of process to really see to it that they are not connected with the left, and they are given permits. Another program is their adult literacy, which focuses on preparing their elders for self-determination and governance in their territories. Thus, there are paralegal training on their rights with special focus on their land rights. And under this program also is the understanding deeply their indigenous spiritual traditions, which are incorporated by the missionaries in their Christian liturgical celebration. You know, the modern day missionary now in the Catholic Church are really dialoguing with the indigenous cultures. Before, you cannot do that. Very strict in terms of liturgy. You have to be bishops and other priests will not allow that. But you know, this time in the mountains with the missionaries, they are dialoguing with cultures, and before their mass, they have this ritual of really cooling the spirits. Before, you cannot do that because there's only one God, and the spirits are the evil spirits. That's the concept of the old missionary. But now it's their new movement. The third program is the cultural research. So the Matamis team have tied up with the academe to do ethnographic sketch on the Taga-Paulo cultural identity. Thus, they have their own narratives which were published, and theatrical or theater plays or presentations were done and being toured around some schools and communities to educate the public about their cultural identity. One of the materials that I gather from them is their Taga-Paulo concept of creation story, which I partner with our IT department because we would like to, another focus of this paper now is to use technology to be able to promote the culture. There is this program with my partner in the school that when this narrative will be done, they can see that there's the river, the horses are running. Instead of just reading the narrative, they can see using the program. So we will be, this is the next move. But basically, I gather only their creation story. But there have been a lot of narratives which they are still under finalization as of the moment. So, but the challenges that they face now, this is the orchestrated cultural annihilation or decimation that they experience. So in the midst of all these longings and dreams to preserve their cultural practices and to have self-autonomy and determination over their lands and territories, they are now confronted with this latest threat. And this is the cultural annihilation, through an orchestrated attempt to remove them from taking control of their land and resources through the following forms of war. Number one is the war against the resources. In some areas of Malita, there is now an attempt from the government and their development partners to wage war against the natural resources such as limestones, gold, and other minerals found in their sacred mountains and forests. The one that we visited with Professor Daniel, and he climbed up that mountain using his bare feet. And a lot of locals are worried because the rocks are very sharp and wild plants have thorns. That's why they perform rituals, because the place is very sacred. Just like in Australia, that they are not really allowing a lot of people to climb. There is a very sacred ritual. But in that mountains, chopper and a lot of helicopters hovering around from the government trying to explore resources. It involves a war against the earth, both in the transformation of living mountains that support life in abundance into dead raw material for making aluminum and other metals, as well as in the dumping of toxic waste which is killing ecosystem and people. There are mountains that uphold the law of nature were pitted against the corporation that does not know what law of nature is all about. It is also a war against the Tigakaulos themselves, because this scale of mining and quarrying is already in the development phase, because roads are really, constructions of roads are ongoing to pave way to this development. Industrial production and dumping of waste can only take place by violating the rights of the citizens and the communities. While the people, the Tagakaulos, belong to a place and have an identity with the earth, called this Mother Earth, that's why the nurturing earth, corporations have no home, no citizenship. The Tagakaulos are worried because they knew that they cannot resist the powerful personalities behind this move. They are trying to lobby support from many people to resist this move. That's where the team, the Matamis team, helped them in organizing themselves in order to have a strong force to resist such development aggression. Second form of war is war against their mind, their original view of a good life and original view of nature. Shiva said that the war against the earth begins in the mind. Its seeds were sown when the living earth was transformed into dead matter to facilitate the Industrial Revolution. The death of nature in the mind allows a war to be unleashed against the earth. After all, if the earth is merely dead matter, then nothing is being killed. As Caroline Merchant points out, this transformation of nature from a living, nurturing mother to inert, dead, and manipulable matter was eminently suited to the exploitation imperative of growing capitalism. The nurturing earth image acted as a cultural constraint on exploitation of nature, but the mastery and domination images created by the Westerns and modern concept and the scientific revolution remove all restraint and function as a cultural sanctions for the denudation of nature. The violence of the mind begins with fragmenting that which is whole, separating that which is connected, thus violating nature and the web of life in exchange of economic gains and modern standard of living. So basically, same with what Professor John has presented. The third form of war is war against traditional farming system. Shiva further said that violent thoughts shape violent actions, and violent categories construct violent tools. And nowhere in this more vivid than in the metaphors and methods on which industrial agriculture and food in the food production is based. Factories that produce poisons and explosives to kill people during the wars were transformed into factories producing agri-chemicals after the wars. Industrial agriculture treats soil as an empty container for industrial fertilizers. According to Shiva, this is how industrial agriculture was introduced as the Green Revolution in India in the 1960s. However, replacing soil fertility with chemical fertilizer was neither green nor revolutionary. It was a recipe for destroying soils, eroding food security, and increasing greenhouse gases which contribute to climate change. So in her study, especially in her book, Making Peace with the Earth, Shiva found out that the green revolution that has been sold in India as a miracle which increased food production. However, the green revolution did not produce more food. That's the concept. Because of this industrial agriculture, there will be more food. But according to Shiva, this green revolution did not produce more food, because food includes cereals and pulses and oil seeds and vegetables, not just rice and wheat. So, and the diversity of crops was destroyed to create the chemical monocultures of rice and wheat. So overall, nutrition per acre went down and toxics per acre went up. The Green Revolution myth is based on hiding both the food production loss and the cost of the burden of environmental toxicity that Punjab, the part of India, carries to provide toxic food to the nation. Toshiba further said that Punjab is the toxic capital of India, so the monoculture of rice and wheat are perfect breeding grounds for pests, and the use of toxic pesticides has kept escalating in that place. While pests are not a problem in ecologically balanced agriculture, in an unstable agricultural system, they pose a series of challenges to agronomy. Later on, although I'm not, because I don't have internet connection, I was supposed to show you a model of really trying to resolve income and environmental protection. And this is a model in near our place. We have this the organic farming of a company that I and Daniel also visited. So, in almost all parts of Malita, Tagakaolo now, the introduction of genetically modified corn and rice has eroded their traditional varieties of corn and rice. Many experts and technocrats entice them to adopt the genetically modified corn and rice to have increased production. That's the idea, increased production with less expenses, because they don't need a lot of laborers. They will just kill the weeds, and they don't have to hire a lot of laborers. But according to some of them, and in my observation also, they were not able to factor in the kind of the social and cultural aspect of coming together to clean the farm. Thus, they made to believe that they have greater income and economic benefits for doing such. But they were not able to factor in, as I said, the social and cultural aspects of such traditional practices. When people come together to clean their farms, they create a sort of bonding that deepens their relationship as members of one tribe. And during the cleaning and even harvesting, they also perform rituals as a community of faithful, thanking their deity, Chonamem, of the bounty of this creation. But now this is gone because of the introduction of these herbicides and pesticides. This modern day farming system imposed by technocrats have destroyed their indigenous, their ecosystem, traditional farming system and practices, and their culture in general. Their indigenous plants, which they use as traditional medicines, were killed because of the pesticides and herbicides, so etc., etc. So all these things are killing their culture, because plants are killed, indigenous, their medicines are killed. Their paris are their church, or where they can pray, their market where they can have their food, and maybe their pharmacy when they can have their medicine. And when you destroy all these things, you destroy the culture. So having destroyed nature's mechanism for controlling pests through the destruction of diversity, the miracle seeds of the Green Revolution, according to Shiva, became mechanism for breeding new pests and creating new diseases. The spread of herbicide-resistant crops has destroyed biodiversity and is causing birth defects. Genetically modified crops have been found to lead to allergic reactions and affect fertility, according to Shiva. Hence, development technocratic aggression is a form of cultural annihilation for the Tagakaulos in Malita, because they cannot enjoy and exercise their freedom and capability to perform the traditional farming systems and practice. The last war is war against their unity. Another challenge faced by these groups of indigenous people is a challenge of being divided. They are not united in terms of responding to issues of development and vision like mining, quarrying, and even introduction of genetically modified crops. Some of them are happy, welcoming, some are resisting. This is because their traditional governance system, like their elders and their tribal leaders, have started to diminish. The Tagakaulos now, basically in the history of Tagakaulos, they don't have datos or the tribal chieftain. They just rely on elders. But now the elders are, they don't have really kind of sort of governing power, because they relied on their representative. In the Philippine government, we have this representative. We call that Indigenous Peoples representative in the Congress and even in the in the local people, as city councilors, and even in the legislative aspects, they just rely on these people. And when these people are coming from the government, their perspective of development is coming from the government. That's why they don't have really legitimate leaders now in the community. So the above mentioned conditions and challenges faced by the Tagakaulos are clear attempts of detribalization or orchestrated cultural annihilation. Vandana Shiva aligns the destruction of natural biodiversity with the dismantling of traditional communities and cultures. Those who understand the language of nature. So, what is our option now? What is the option that we can take now as part of the civil society organization, especially for us living in that place and in the academy? I would say at the start, maybe it depends on what is your concept also of the good life, what is your concept of values, where we would like you to place your value, especially the one presented by Professor Jan. For me, since the destruction of culture is a result of the destruction of their lands and environment because of development aggression, one option that we, or personally I can work with the Tagakaulo, is helping them in protecting their lands against exploitation by corporations. And to help them to develop their land using the traditional knowledge and also some technology, marrying some technology, especially in the idea of organic farming. There is one model that I would like to show, supposedly, but I would like to work this now, that I would like to bring some of their leaders. I already contacted the leaders of one of the leaders of the Matamis to bring some of their tribes to this place, because it's also true that they also need economic development, and that's why some of them are not forced to really embrace this genetically modified because of the promise of a lot of income. But when the destruction of the environment because of this, in the long term, they will loss in terms of income. This model, the Lao integrated farm, I cannot show you the picture because the owner of that is not is a Bagobo. It's not a Tagakaulo. It's near our place. He's a lawyer. He's a head of the immigration in Davao, but he resigned to develop his area. At first, there was only 5 hectares with 5 workers, and now their area is only 15 with 500 workers. And they're even exporting their product to 8 countries, and they have income without destruction of the environment. It's very organic. Everything is useful, even the waste of the goats, etc., of their poultry and other things are being used as pesticides and herbicides, natural pesticides, herbicides. So very basically having economic gain with protection of the environment. That's where I would like to help these people. To end, Shiba said that the ecological and economic problems we face are rooted in a series of reductionist steps which have shrunk our imagination and our identity, our purpose on the earth, and the instruments we use to meet our needs. We are first and foremost citizens of the earth, and therefore our highest duty is to maintain the living systems of the earth that support our life. Earth or nature citizenship needs earth-nature-centered cultures, earth-based or nature-based democracy, and earth-nature-centered economies. So, Angel, enjoying the mineral coming from the mountain, mineral water. The more we respect nature, the more she provides for our needs. The more food we give back to the soil in the form of organic matter, the more fertile the soil becomes and can produce more food. The more water we return to the hydrological cycle, the more water there is in our wells and rivers to provide for our human needs. And when people have their basic needs satisfied, rather, the more they can work for the satisfaction of their higher needs, such as enjoying their freedom and capability to sustain their culture and traditions. So in my experience with the IPs, every time I'm in their community, I experience a kind of deep joy and freedom. Eating with them, talking to them. In fact, if I'm already at a loss in terms of my work in the college, I would really spend time climbing up the mountain and spending time with them, because this is where I can also be rejuvenated. Their culture is not only seduce me, they really revitalize me. And that's where I would like to have this dialogue with their land. I feel so good, experience of freedom and immense joy. And for me, I think this is a good life, and this is genuine development. And this is where I would like to help them, trying to really, it's not also imposing, but trying to encourage them that their kind of life is the good life. Because a lot of them are enticed to really transfer. The volunteer teachers from their schools, they have 4 schools now, the IP schools. The moment they graduate, they will graduate to become a licensed teacher. Some of them would work in the Department of Education for higher salary. I tried to do cost-benefit analysis. I told this one guy, where is that guy? This one guy, he's already a graduate, just finished and passed the board exam. He cried when I talked to him, because he would really love to stay, but his parents tried to impose that he will work in the government. I made a cost-benefit analysis. How the salary that they receive in that place in that school is only 8,000, but they have free lodging and food coming from the community. And I told him, when you work there, you have this 20,000, for example, but you spend this much and this much and this much. At the end of the day, life here is more good than life there. So I hope, anyway, at the end of the day, imposing is also a violation of their choice. So I just present some alternatives. So with that, this is still a continuing research. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Rogelio.
Yeah, that one.
Yes, in fact, Daniel came in January, and that's where Daniel met Rogelio. And Marlon also went to the conference as well. Yeah. So it's good. So thank you. I'd like to open for discussion. It's linked to a paper just before by John.
By the way, this lady is a pure Taga-Paulos, a graduate of Masters in Anthropology in Ateneo de Davao University.
Wow.
That's where he worked. Despite a lot of offers from other institutions, she stayed. That's very nice.
Yep. To try and support the local community. Yep. Okay. In fact, in anthropology, sometimes if we want to, sometimes if we actually want to report or study or describe or be a partner with the local community, we may have to actually be from the community to be respected. And in some fact, some tribal nations will not talk to people outside the tribe. So I think it's actually for the understanding of the traditions, it's really important. I guess that's her motivation, part of it. Yes, please.
I've been working for how many years in my life with people, different peoples, but first time that I have this first-hand information and knowledge from what you. So it's beautifully done. So congratulations. So my interest is more of as if the government, especially I think it seems very common that the government seems there's that dilemma of the government how to sustain the people at the expense of the natural world. So my concern is, okay, this is maybe because of a long time Western or old values that is somehow intermingled in the culture, in the local culture. Now my question is, in your own assessment, what how do you call that? Where's that again? Right. How genius or how? So first point is how genius is the IP's idea of environmental care vis-a-vis their own sustainability. So can you say that they're genius in terms of caring the natural world vis-a-vis with their own sustainability is really integral, interdependent? Is there also an aspect wherein outside of the government's intrusive means to their lives, to their resources, could you also see some points wherein you could say that they have their own participation of corruption or exploitation of their own culture, of their own resources?
Thank you, Father. It's really a very nice question. I would say that given the chance with no intrusion, and which is basically really impossible to happen given the globalization and all this increase of people and decrease of land, so really it's difficult that they will be left without intrusion. But given the premise that they will be left on their own, I would say they have this ecological genius in terms of really taking care of the environment because of the concept that they have this deep communion with nature. They consider nature as mother, nurturing mother, and their values is basically reciprocal. They have reciprocity, and that's where they would not exploit. They just get what they need, and respecting of elements of the nature, rocks, trees, rivers, etc. They cannot just exploit. They even ask from the spirits. They have these rituals. Even before cutting trees, they have to put a certain axe, and when this axe fell down, seemingly if you are coming from the perspective of science, seemingly ridiculous, because they will not cut. Even the axe will fall down, and they will not cut the tree if there is a sound of the bird. It's a signal that the spirit won't allow you to cut the tree. So given that premise, they are ecologically genius in terms of taking care of their environment. And they have food there in the area. They have abundance without intrusion. The only thing that they are now economically impoverished because of the coming of all this development aggression that really destroyed the biodiversity. They introduced this kind of food, the rice and the corn, but they have plenty of food before. But they cannot grow some of this food. That's why they have this economic, and this is the effort of dominant development paradigm, because they are now lack of something. They would like to introduce this one. That's why to entice people to really give in some of their lands for development, because they cannot produce something. Given that the premise that they are not being manipulated. But the other thing is the question of they also participate in corruption. I think they participated because of the intrusion. I would still say because of the intrusion, the coming of other cultures, the cash economy. When cash economy was introduced into their system, that's where corruption also comes in. Because before they don't have cash economy, they don't have cash. They don't even corrupt. In one community that I visited, when they get a kind of wild deer, they share that to people because they don't have refrigerator, etc. They live a communal life, and they're happy. But when some cultures are coming in, that's where some of these concepts and values are also being influenced. But I said I cannot also say that this is an inevitable force. People will really come in. People will really go, and maybe how many years from now is a fear that this cultural decimation and annihilation will really continue because of this kind of neoliberal concept, economic concept and model of development, really trying to pursue a lot of resources for economic gains.
On point that was mentioned by Sir on protecting the environment, I wouldn't call them genius, I think, on protecting the environment. I think the better term would be experts in protecting the environment. As what was presented by Sir John a while ago, the way indigenous peoples treat nature is not as a subject or as a tool. They treat themselves as part of the nature, meaning they understand what's happening in the nature. Pharmaceutical companies spend billions to create new drugs that cure diseases that these indigenous people have been curing already since hundreds of years ago, just by understanding nature, understanding leaves, understanding the plants around them. These indigenous peoples have been farming and tilting the lands even before agriculture, the current agriculture came. They know when to plant, even though they don't have calendars. And they know where to plant and how to plant different specific species of plants. So when it comes to environmental protections, I could really say that the indigenous peoples are experts because they treat themselves as part of nature. And what way to better understand nature than to be part of it?
Okay.
Just one
Yes, please, Lam.
comment I want to add to what you said. Pharmaceutical companies don't want to spend money on drugs. They want us to pay for it on the university system, and then they take it. That's how they do it. Pharmaceutical companies spend about maybe 4 or 5% on research and about 25% on marketing. Most of the drugs are developed in what we call the dynamic state sector. The private economy is inept. It's been known for many years. So just a little addition there. Of course, the indigenous people, they're outside of this because, biopiracy and all of that kind of stuff.
In fact, are they outside, or they may in fact be just not recognized because of a source of knowledge, and that's. But how do we bring them ethically into the system, which they are one part of it in terms of knowledge production, but just not in terms of a market system, I guess.
And also, if I may add, we did a research before, I think 4 years ago, when we documented different strategies and techniques that indigenous peoples use, the blaan, that they use to still continue farming even if it's rainy season or if it's dry season. These are actually indigenous knowledge that have been there for lots and lots of years that are not recorded and are not recognized, that these actually are good techniques. Like, how do they dry corn during rainy season? When do they plant? When they see a bird, they call it the taho bird. Then when they see the bird, that they know it's already planting season. Then when the bird returns, they know it's already harvest season. So these are actually indigenous knowledge that are not documented. So on that aspect, I think this is where the academic's part should come in. We should be able to document these knowledges, protect them, preserve them, give these to proper people, private or public, so that they can be used to answer the challenge that was again posted earlier. How do we marry cultural preservation, environmental preservation, and development? As what has been mentioned by Ma'am a while ago, this is not always black and white or good or bad. It's not always environment versus development. This is a wider spectrum, and hopefully along that spectrum we could see how we marry development and environmental conservation and cultural conservation without fighting.
Yes, Orion?
If I may add, what Roger is doing is he's doing it in bold strokes. Theoretically, it's there. Maybe the challenge now is with regard to data and facts. For instance, in terms of the population of these IP people, if you really are talking about development framework, you have to consider their education, how many of these children are in school, and how many of these children continue to study using their own school system, and how many have gone out to study the present school system in the country, who are actually employed outside. While it's inspiring to see someone go back to the community, it's really important to gather data and facts, because that's the only way the government can intervene in terms of policy. So you have to consider, is the approach state-centric or people-centered? Because advocacy doesn't really solve these problems. It only gives us a clear message in terms of where we must go. But if we have to approach, we have to do it scientifically, we have to do it by legislation, because we also have to use these means that have also helped societies that have progressed practically, economically, because there's nothing wrong with modernity. What's wrong is when modernity exploits people and oppresses people. But there are good people even in corporate entities. You belong to a school. Schools are profit-making enterprises. And so we have to consider these things so that we can approach the problem in a way that will really, if we consider outcomes, this becomes meaningful outcomes.
Thank you, sir. And that's part of the long-term. Wow.
Okay, well, thank you very much, Rogelio. Great work progressing.